Today, we are diving into an event so massive, so all-encompassing, that it literally redrew the map of the modern world. We're talking, of course, about the Second World War. And this was so much more than a war over land. It was a global fight that completely reshaped the world we all live in right now.
But before we get into the politics, the strategy, the battles, we have to start with the single most important fact: the human cost. Over 70 million people. That number is so huge, it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around. But that unbelievable loss is the backdrop for everything else we're about to cover.
All right, so to understand this whole thing, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. First, we'll look at how it all started with the leftovers of the First War. Then, we'll see the Axis powers' initial, terrifying blitz across the globe. After that, how the tide finally began to turn. We'll trace the long road to an Allied victory, and then we'll explore the brand new world that rose from the ashes.
So where does a conflict this huge even begin? Well, World War II didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was really the explosive sequel to World War I, fueled by all the tensions left simmering for 20 years.
And right at the heart of it all was the Treaty of Versailles. This thing basically forced Germany to pay crippling amounts of money, give up huge chunks of territory, and slash its military. This wasn't just a political deal. It created this deep, nationwide feeling of humiliation and anger. And that anger was the perfect fertile ground for extremist leaders like Adolf Hitler, who came along promising to restore Germany's glory.
And throughout the 1930s, you can just see that anger boiling over. It's like a drumbeat of aggression. Japan invades Manchuria. Italy invades Ethiopia. Germany just marches its troops right back into the Rhineland, which was supposed to be a demilitarized zone. Each of these moves was a test, a clear violation of international law, and each time they were met with, well, not much.
And that lack of a strong response, it had a name: appeasement. The idea, the hope really, was that if the other world powers just gave countries like Germany a little bit of what they wanted, a bigger war could be avoided. The most famous example is the Munich Agreement, where they literally handed over a piece of Czechoslovakia to Hitler. But instead of calming him down, these concessions just made him bolder. It proved to him that no one was willing to stop him.
So as you can imagine, all of this tension eventually hardened into 2 opposing sides. In one corner, you've got the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, united by their aggressive, expansionist ambitions. And lining up against them, you have a pretty diverse group that would eventually become the Allied powers, a coalition that would have to come together to try and stop this onslaught.
With appeasement having failed completely, the world just plunged into war. And those first few years, they were defined by the absolutely shocking and overwhelming success of the Axis powers.
Germany unleashed this terrifying new type of warfare called blitzkrieg, which means lightning war, and that's exactly what it was. Using tightly coordinated attacks with tanks, planes, and infantry, they moved with unbelievable speed. In less than a year, they had just rolled over Poland and most of Western Europe, including France, which was supposed to be a major military power. It honestly looked like nothing on Earth could stop them.
And then, the conflict went from being a massive European war to a truly global one. On December 7, 1941, Japan, trying to secure its own empire in Asia, launched that infamous surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. In a single morning, the sleeping giant, the United States, with all its industrial might, was pulled into the fight, and the stage was set for a worldwide war across 2 massive theaters, Europe and the Pacific.
For those first few years, the Axis really did seem unstoppable. But starting around 1942, the momentum began to shift. This was the critical moment, the turning point where the Allies finally managed to stop the bleeding.
But first, you have to appreciate just how dire the situation was. I mean, look at this. By mid-1942, the Axis controlled a massive empire, stretching from the coast of France all the way to the suburbs of Moscow, and they'd conquered huge territories across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. For the Allies, it was an incredibly dark time.
So what changed? How did they stop this juggernaut? It really came down to 2 absolutely pivotal battles on opposite sides of the planet. On the Eastern Front, you had the brutal, city-destroying Battle of Stalingrad, where the Soviet Red Army finally managed to halt and then encircle an entire German army. And out in the Pacific, you had the naval battle of Midway, where the U.S. Navy delivered a crippling blow to the Japanese fleet. These 2 victories, they were the moments the tide finally began to turn.
And it's so important to understand that these were 2 totally different kinds of wars being fought at the same time.
The war in Europe, that was a slugfest. Massive armies, huge tank battles, the bombing of major cities. But the Pacific Theater, that was a war of incredible distances across the ocean, fought with aircraft carriers and brutal, bloody landings on tiny jungle islands.
Okay, so with the Axis advance finally stopped, the Allies seized the initiative. The final phase of the war was this long, bloody, but absolutely relentless push towards victory.
And this final push was like a giant feist closing in from all sides. From the west, you get D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in human history, which finally opened that critical second front in France. At the exact same time from the east, the Soviets launched Operation Bagration, a colossal offensive that just completely shattered an entire German army group. And all the while in the Pacific, the U.S. island-hopping campaign was capturing one strategic island after another, getting closer and closer to Japan itself.
Squeezed from the east and the west, Hitler's war machine just finally collapsed. Soviet troops fought their way street by bloody street into the heart of Berlin. And on May 8, 1945, a day we now call VE Day, Germany offered its unconditional surrender. The war in Europe was finally over.
But even then, the war wasn't done. Japan's military vowed to fight to the last man. So, to force a surrender and avoid what was predicted to be an incredibly bloody invasion, the United States made a decision that changed the world forever. It dropped 2 atomic bombs, first on Hiroshima, then on Nagasaki. That, combined with a massive Soviet invasion of Japanese-held Manchuria, finally led Japan to surrender on September 2, 1945. World War II had ended.
The last shots were fired, but the world was completely and irrevocably changed. The legacy of this war isn't just something you read about in history books, it's the foundation of the world we're living in right now.
We have to come back to the human cost, because some of these numbers are they're beyond belief. In the Soviet Union alone, an estimated 27 million people died. Let that sink in. 27 million. That was roughly 1 out of every 4 people in the entire Soviet population who was either killed or wounded. That level of trauma shaped everything about that country for decades to come.
And within the war's immense death toll lies one of humanity's darkest moments, the Holocaust. This wasn't a casualty of war. This was the systematic, industrial-scale, state-sponsored murder of 6 million Jewish people. It was a genocide of such calculated cruelty, it's something we can never, ever forget.
And from all of that destruction, a totally new world order was born. You get the United Nations, created specifically to try and prevent this from ever happening again. The old European powers were shattered, which left the United States and the Soviet Union as the 2 new rival superpowers, kicking off the Cold War. The bomb ushered in the nuclear age. And all over the world, the old colonial empires began to crumble.
So here's the real takeaway. The end of the war wasn't just an end. It was a new beginning. It drew new borders, created new rivalries, and forged new alliances. And that leaves us with one last question to think about. As you look at the world today, the conflicts, the alliances, the global tensions, how many of them can you trace right back to the world that was created in 1945?